Welcome to All Things Marketing Podcast, the podcast that talks all things marketing for both franchise and multi-location marketing leaders. ATM is brought to you by PureDriven. We'll show you how to turn your brand into a money-making machine. Here's your host, Steve Rockwood.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Franchise ATM. My name is Steve Rockwood. I'm the marketing manager here at PureDriven. And today I want to talk to you about finding the best and fastest way to do something to really build business efficiencies, especially when it comes to marketing and especially when it comes to digital marketing. It's a lot of especiallys. That's probably not very efficient, huh? Anyway, basically, when I'm working, I really like to find the best way to do something, and also I like to find the fastest way to do that thing. So my first suggestion for you when doing anything on the computer, it's simple and it's free, and that is to learn the keyboard shortcuts to the programs that you're using. So keyboard shortcuts are basically hitting the Control button and S, right? Control save, Control S. It saves the document. So whatever programs you find yourself using often, learn the keyboard shortcuts. It makes it so much faster to do things. So much faster. Next up, create macros for processes that you do often that you can just automate. So creating macros is very simple. There are a ton of different programs out there that will help you do this. You don't need to know how to code like you used to back in the day. There are many different things that will do this for you. Now, if you have no business in doing any sort of macros and you don't want to do any of the programming on the computer side or just any screen recording or anything, you can buy something called an Elgato Stream Deck, which is basically a built-in macro device that sits on your desktop. So I use one for the podcast quite often. I can set the record button, the stop button. I can mute people on demand. It basically does a lot of keyboard shortcuts without having to remember the shortcut or make the noise of the keyboard, which can be quite distracting. So there are some options out there. I really do like the Stream Deck. There are other devices out there that also have macros built in, but you'll probably find that they're super helpful. So macros and shortcuts. And just to explain how I use these, basically I make the podcast, right? So I record the podcast. And if I have a guest, I have to record the podcast on my end, and then I also have to record their voice. So I have two different voices coming in. I also have the podcast intro that you heard right before I started talking, as well as the podcast outro. So there's some different parts that have to come together to make each podcast episode. So what I did is I set up my Elgato Stream Deck to have different macros for different sounds. So the first thing I do is I record the podcast. And the way I do that is I set up a button called record. And when I hit it, basically what it will do is it will mute everyone's microphone, and then it will start recording, and then it will automatically play the intro. So I hit one button and it accomplished muting everyone's microphone so no one talks during the intro. It accomplished recording, and it accomplished actually playing the intro so that I can hear the intro and then I can start talking as soon as the intro is done. So it records all those things at once, and then it automatically unmutes the microphone with 5 seconds to go in the intro. So as soon as I should start talking, it unmutes me so I can prepare and get ready to start talking. So that's one of my buttons. Then I have the outro button. So after the podcast is finished, I say thank you to my guest. I say goodbye to you guys. I hit the stop recording button. And what that button does is it mutes everyone's microphone again, and then it plays the outro. Then as soon as the outro is done playing, it stops the recording. I also have it so it opens up the folder that the recording is in so that I can easily find it as soon as it's done. Now, if that's not enough to say, wow, that's pretty efficient, that's pretty cool, because now your whole podcast is together, I have one final thing that I do. So when the podcast is being recorded, I'm in the left speaker or headphone. The guest is in the right speaker or headphone, and then the intro and outro are stereo, so they're in both. So if you listen to the podcast originally, the original file and you had earbuds in and you only had one or the other, you would only hear one half of the conversation. So what I do is I go into Adobe Audition, and this is where the favorites come in, the macros. So I created a favorite in Adobe Audition, which is basically just a big macro, and it just let me record what I wanted. So I have these 4 different audio tracks. So I did a favorite where I converted them all into one track, convert to mono, and then I balance all the audio. So I have an automatic process where it balances the audio so that our voices are very similar to the same volume. And then I place a compressor on it so that it never goes too loud and it sounds like a podcast. And then I have it go through a noise leveler so it goes to the podcast standard of -16 loofs or lufs or however they're pronounced. And then it automatically applies all the effects and it spits out the finished podcast. So I hit one button to do all that now because I took the time to set that up. So basically, I took this really long process of recording a podcast, editing a podcast, converting a podcast, rendering a podcast, then going back and rendering the podcast again with the correct sound levels, to doing that all with 3 buttons. So it's very valuable, helps me every single day. So that's my suggestion, is look at what you currently do on a daily basis and see if you can do it better and faster, and see if you can use keyboard shortcuts, macros, or a different tool to help you do that. So I think I brought up Meet Edgar a couple podcasts ago, and Meet Edgar is basically a social media posting tool. But what it does is it allows you to reuse some of your old posts, and you can make variations of your posts while you do it. So if you spend an hour every week on Meet Edgar, you could schedule probably hundreds of posts and reuse your content and make sure it gets to the right people, gets to the right audience. So that's one of the tools that I really like because it works the same way I do. It's very efficient for me. Doing things in bulk is how I like to do things. So it's a good pair for me. Some people might find other tools that they like better because they like to schedule differently than I do. So my advice there is find tools that work for what you need. And then finally, this one's kind of tricky at first, but find the tools that you like, find what you like about them, and then try and recreate those in your own process. So for instance, there was this company, I believe a local company, that they had a program where you got a monthly charge and then they would give you a hashtag to use on your social media. So if you use that hashtag, then they would go in and boost your post for you because they knew that basically that hashtag was saying, hey, boost my post, right? So they would do that, and I saw that tool and I was like, that's kind of clever, but there's probably some other way I could use that. So rather than use their tool, I recreated what that tool was doing so that I could get notifications on hashtags. And then I put all those notifications into a Google Doc, and I can track where all these hashtags are. So now I can track hashtags that I think are valuable to my business and myself, and then I can go find all those posts, and they're all saved in a Google Doc. So that's just one way that I kind of recreate a tool to work for me because someone else had a great idea, and then wasn't the idea that I needed, but I could use that to make something else. Finally, just experiment. Just experiment with what you're doing. Try stuff the old way, record how long it took you. Try stuff a new way, record how long it took you. And then don't be afraid to sit there and do nothing and just think about how to do something more efficiently. Obviously, if you're trying to make a task that only takes 1 minute a week more efficient, you're probably going to spend more time trying to make it efficient than actually just doing it the normal way. But if you have these time sucks in your day, find more efficient ways to do it. Sit down, just draw it out, see if you can do anything to make it more efficient. And then speaking of drawing it out, the final step here is write it down. I can't suggest this enough. Write down the little shortcuts that you come up with and write down the processes that you use to get your content out there, or the processes that you use to speed up all of your day-to-day things, because you might forget, or You might go on vacation for a month and leave these tasks in the hands of a manager, and it's much better if you can just give them some notes on how to do stuff faster than trying to teach them 1 hour before your flight leaves. So that is my advice on how to find some better ways to do things and faster ways to do things. I hope that helped. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, steve.rockwood@puredriven.com. That is all I have for you today, my friends. So thank you for listening, and I will see you here next time on Franchise ATM.
You just listened to All Things Marketing Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast to catch every new episode every day. Want to be a guest on the show? Sign up at puredriven.com/guest. See you tomorrow here at the ATM.